Hello, and welcome to another episode of Headlines, your periodic daily news podcast from the Orchard. I'm your host, Jeremy Appel, speaking to you from a piece of Treaty 6 territory you may recognize as Edmonton. If you'd like my work and have the means, please consider becoming a paid Orchard subscriber so that I can continue doing it. But don't just take my word for it. Paid subscriber Emily Kitteringham calls this newsletter media that reports the facts without embellishing the truth. Thanks, Emily. Here are some of the top news stories on Wednesday, June 3rd, 2026. Today we begin here in Edmonton. Alberta's United Conservative government has appointed a retired judge to chair a panel tasked with redrawing Alberta's electoral boundaries from scratch. But just one problem. Former provincial justice Brian O'Farrell is a UCP donor, raising additional concerns about the impartiality of a process that was partisan from its inception. One Brian Kenneth O'Farrell of Calgary donated $1,300 to the UCP in 2025 and $1,000 in 2024. He also donated $500 to the Calgary Elbow UCP Constituency Association in 2022. Additionally, he gave $1,700 to the federal Conservatives in 2023 and again in 2024. The panel was established after Premier Danielle Smith decided to throw out the work of the official Electoral Boundaries Commission, or EBC, after months of public hearings. She did so because the EBC's two UCP appointees took the unprecedented step of issuing a minority report with entirely different proposed ridings than the majority. The minority's proposals included carving up Calgary into a dozen urban-rural hybrid ridings that would have given the UCP an electoral advantage. Citing a lack of consensus on the new electoral map, Premier Smith decided to appoint a panel of MLAs with 2 government members and 2 opposition members to start over again. The party's appointments are due by the end of this week. Don Pentelchuk, the acting Chief Justice of Alberta, declined to assist the government in finding a chair for the panel, citing the irregularity of the process. The Law Society of Alberta and the Alberta chapter of the Canadian Bar Association also declined to participate. NDP MLA Kathleen Ganley, former Justice Minister, says that the issue isn't O'Farrell's understanding of the law, but his partisan affiliation. UCP MLA Garth Roswell argues that O'Farrell's donations have no impact on his ability to perform the role impartially and independently. Whatever you say. Moving to Ottawa, Canada-US Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc has written a letter to his American and Mexican counterparts expressing a desire to renew their existing trade agreement for 16 years. LeBlanc added that he's willing to make adjustments to the Canada-Mexico-US trade agreement, but wouldn't specify what they are. The letter, which was sent Monday and publicized Tuesday, serves as a formal notification that all parties are required to submit by July 1st on whether they want to renew or review the 2018 agreement. On Monday night, U.S. President Donald Trump shared an article on his Truth Social platform about Canada's economy having contracted in 2 consecutive quarters with the caption, 51st state. This was reposted on Twitter by Trump's ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, who had previously made light of Trump's annexationist threats. Asked to respond to Trump's post, Prime Minister Mark Carney called the president an exceptionally active user of social media, which is certainly one way to put it, adding that he feels no obligation to respond to every post Trump makes. We take the administration as it is, Carney told reporters. The prime minister added that while Mexico's bilateral negotiations with the U.S. are focused on technical issues, Canada has to address more fundamental structural issues with the Americans. He cited Trump's tariffs on automobiles, steel, aluminum, and forestry products. Carney reiterated his call last week for a new partnership with the Americans, leaving out the part where he said to make America great again. Staying in Ottawa, but reorienting towards the Middle East, the Canadian government is expediting student visas for about 36 Palestinians from Gaza who are stranded in third countries. But advocacy group Palestinian Students and Scholars at Risk, or PSSR, has likened the interview process for these students to a witch hunt. Teresa Zorick is the president of the Canadian University Teachers Association, in addition to being a member of PSSR. She said at a Tuesday news conference that immigration officials are demanding to know why the students attended state-run schools in Gaza, accusing them of being affiliated with the militant group Hamas. The students have shared with us other lines of questioning that are all premised on the idea that you're guilty until proven innocent, with gotcha-type questions, says Zorick. Palestinian students have been waiting for as many as 2 years to be accepted for a Canadian visa, leading organizations like PSSR to advocate for their expedited acceptance. Normally, notes Canadian press reporter David Baxter, student visas take a matter of weeks to process. There are about 130 Palestinian students who have been accepted into research roles at Canadian post-secondary institutions, but remain stuck elsewhere, including in Gaza. According to a spokesperson for Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, none of the 37 students whose applications have been expedited are in Gaza. Most of them have received a final decision, but the ministry won't say how many were accepted or rejected. PSSR board member Amer Shalabi, an engineering professor at the University of Toronto, says he's unaware of any Palestinian students whose visas have been accepted. He is, however, aware of students who have given up on their application and withdrawn it. They have lost hope in the possibility of receiving a favorable response from Canada, or at least a transparent process that they can understand, Shalabi said at the press conference. The students are now confused, stuck, and have lost hope. The Israeli military, by the way, has destroyed every post-secondary institution in Gaza. Finally, we turn to Newmarket, Ontario, where Kenneth Law pled guilty last week to coaxing vulnerable people into committing suicide and selling them the material to do it on Shopify. According to an agreed statement of facts, Shopify paid Law $150,000 between January 2020 and May 2023 for selling toxic salt and suffocation equipment on the Canadian tech platform. Law has admitted to causing the deaths of nearly 100 people in Ontario and the UK, and authorities suspect him of responsibility for deaths in Quebec, the US, and New Zealand. Ontario prosecutors say that the deaths of Law's victims continued until January 2026. A few years ago, a Shopify spokesperson told the CBC that when it became aware that Law was violating its acceptable use policy, the company reviewed and took action to terminate all stores associated with him. But the company hasn't disclosed when or how it became aware of his behavior, nor did it respond to CBC's request for comment for a story on Tuesday. Law sometimes concealed his product's purpose, referring, for example, to a poison as meat curing salt. But other times he was more explicit, advertising an exit mask and sharing an email from a former client's estate that explicitly noted their death by suicide. University of Ottawa law professor Jennifer Quaid told the CBC that existing Canadian laws don't hold platforms criminally liable for online third-party sales. Unfortunately, says Quaid, an entity like Shopify can say, "We didn't know about it, But as soon as we found out about it, of course, we removed it. The court will hear victim impact statements in September, with Law's sentencing to be scheduled then for a later date. Those are your headlines for Wednesday, June 3rd, 2026. Again, if you like my work, please consider becoming a paid Orchard subscriber. Catch you next time.